What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday, and today we are going to compare the Zeta toys Kronos versus the Fans Toys Ethereaon. What am I, a linguist? A lot of hype surrounding these two. I have a lot of thoughts on this. If you're looking for more thoughts on this as well as other Sit Down Saturdays, including one that I have coming up, which is going to be a retrospective look at the Fans Toys Ethereaon, you need to come over to Patreon. The link is in the description, where for just $5 a month, you get all my reviews, 4 Dummies Uncut, Sit Down Saturday, First Impressions, etc., etc. All you gotta do is skip one big gulp at 7-Eleven. Bought and paid for, love. But I am excited to get into that, because I think it's going to be interesting looking back at it all. But that's not why we're here today. Why we're here today is to compare these two titans. And I don't mean that in the sense of scale, although I don't necessarily not mean that either. I mean that in the sense of reputation. There's a number of things we have to take into account with this, one of which being the amount of time between the releases. We're looking at over 5 years between them. And we also have to think about other things. The price, one is double the price. These are all things that you need to consider. I need to try to weigh everything equally so that my bias don't creep in any more than it's going to anyway. Because a lot of this is subjective. Speaking of which, when it comes to the scale chart, we always have to use the Sunbus scale chart. This is the best we have. This one's even trickier because it's at an angle, but you'll see when we get there. At the end, I'll talk to you about why I'm keeping the pieces I'm keeping and how I'm keeping them, and I'll give pictures as to why, and then we'll also go into a more detailed look at the potential winners. But with that being said, you know where we have to start. We start with accessories. They both come with the gun. The Zeta, I thought, had a ox face option, but I don't seem to see one in my review. But even if they did, the Fans Toys comes with swap out horns, or antenna, if you will. Comes with alternate faces. And then in gimmicks, the Fans Toys also offers the Studio Ox and cartoon/toy look, as well as the light up feature in the head. So actually, Zeta has a light up feature for the head too. But Fans Toys has the whole swap out chest piece gimmick, so I'm still going to give the point to Fans Toys. Fans Toys is going to take both the accessories and gimmicks department. Moving on to build and materials. So materials are going to go to Fans Toys. Their plastics feel better. The weight of it does feel better, but less than the weight, the plastics. The plastics just feel more refined. They feel more sophisticated. They just feel of higher quality. Build, I'm tying them out. I'm tying them out because they both lock in pretty heavy. The Fans Toys is more stable forward and back. The Zeta is more stable side to side. Some of the parts in the lower legs of the Zeta have a tendency to come undone. Some of the parts in the lower legs of Fans Toys tend to come undone. And moving on to hardware, Zeta takes the win. They both have ratchets in the shoulders moving both ways. They both have ratchets in the waist and ab crunch. They both have ratchets in the hips both ways. And they both have ratchets in the knees. But Zeta has a double jointed ratcheted knee. Fans Toys has a single. That's just an objective win for Zeta in the hardware category. All right, so let's move on to sculpt and paint. Looking at them from the front, I'm tying them out for sculpt. Why? Because I think the Fans Toys has some kind of more interesting sculpt work going on in the chest, but most of them I think are pretty even. However, I think the proportions are better on the Zeta than they are on the Fans Toys. That's my personal opinion. That's subjective, of course, but I have to call it the way that I see it. Paint all the way across the board is going to go to Fans Toys top to bottom. Their figures are just better painted. Easy win. Moving on to the head sculpt, I'm giving it to Fans Toys. I think the proportions of the face are actually better done here. I think the side helmet wings are more pronounced. I think the extra details in the sides of the antenna are better. And then paint-wise, of course, is going to Fans Toys. For one, the eyes aren't dead like they are on the Zeta. For two, it has the chrome option for the antenna. They're not displayed here, but I just think they're stunning. From the side, once again, I'm going to give it to Fans Toys. I think that it looks more like a head, so to speak. It doesn't look stunted like the back of the Zeta. And then the extra detailings that are used for the Studio Ox look of Ethereaon's head for Fans Toys add some extra detail even when it's in the Toon look for Fans Toys. I'm giving it to Fans Toys. Moving on to the torso, I think Fans Toys edges them out here, so to speak. There's just more interesting line work going on here. This reminds me of old school Fans Toys. This is what I like to see. I'm actually quite fond of how they did this. The Zeta looks great too, and under normal circumstances between the two, I would have expected Zetas to win. But this has a little bit more of that old school Ethereaon Fans Toys vibe. Probably because it was designed back in old school Fans Toys vibe. but nonetheless, it still counts. From the side, I think Fans Toys takes it. It just cleans up a bit better. The Zeta does a great job. Fans Toys just does it a bit better. Looks more cohesive, uses more of the parts forming to get it done. But that's one of my criticisms about Fans Toys and Zeta with this set is you guys were going full parts forming. So go full parts forming. And that's where Fans Toys wins here by going full parts forming. They could have done something a bit better in the lower legs, in my opinion, by following that same strategy. But yeah, I think they take that. Moving on to the pelvis, I don't have the Fans Toys one plugged quite in 100%. But even be that as it may, I still think the Fans Toys wins here. Once again, it just has more sculpted detail, which is unlike Fans Toys these days, but that's what I loved about Fans Toys. It was sculpted detail that made the old school Toon look designs look more mature, and you still get that here. And I think it wins for it. Even though the Zeta has a little bit more color breakup, I think the Fans Toys looks better because it has more design in it. So the pelvis from the side, I'm going to tie them because I like that Fans Toys tries to cover up the joint, but I like the shape of the Zeta better. So I like elements about both, but that still isn't enough to win Zeta the category in the pelvis, which will put Fans Toys up for the point. The arms. So from the front, just talking about slingshot, it's rough. So once again, I have to account for the wings on the Zeta being removed. I think I like the jet look on the Zeta better at the top, but I like the lower. God, they're like tied at the bottom, honestly. I gotta give it to Zeta. I gotta give it to Zeta from the side view, or the front view, rather. I just think it looks better. I think the details on the jet help with that, and I think even if you had the wings on the Zeta, you would still see that like Tampo paint stuff and little extra breakup color-wise. That helps with that. I just think it looks better. From the side view of Slingshot, I like the Zeta better. It closes up the forearm better. It doesn't look as unfinished as the Fans Toys in that regard. They both kind of handle the cockpit and such similarly, so that the upper arm is kind of a tie, but the lower arm I think is better on the Zeta. Now, moving on to Fireflight, I don't feel like the difference is that egregious. However, I still like the jet look of the Zeta better with the thrusters, but I like how the tail fin ends a little shorter on the Fans Toys. And then the lower arms, I like the color breakup with the red and white on the Zeta. So I'm going to tie them out for the upper arm. I'm going to give Zeta the front view. Now, honestly, from the side, I think that Fans Toys kind of looks more finished, especially in the lower arm. And the upper arm, I feel like it's a tie between the two. So I think Fans Toys takes the lower arm from the side, and I think Zeta takes the frontal view, giving Zeta the win overall on the arms, because I just think it looks better from most angles. But the differences are small, I agree. Moving on to the legs, I think I like, it's funny, I think I actually like the front view of the Zeta better, even though I like the sculpt work on the Fans Toys, just really focusing on the upper legs. The breakup of all of the panels due to trying to do the flight stands, I think do a disservice overall to the general aesthetic. But the front of the lower legs, I think is much better. It just looks more purposeful. I think it has to do with the way that the kneecaps and lower legs work on the Fans Toys versus how they work on the Zeta that make it just look more purposeful. All right, so the legs from the side. So I like the upper legs of the Fans Toys better. Once again, due to sculpted detail and all the extra stuff, those pistons and such, give it a little extra flair. The knees are about equal to me. The lower legs, I think neither one of them really nail that, but I like the Zeta better. So from the side, I think Zeta takes the lower legs and Fans Toys takes the upper legs. Now from the back, once again, it's a mixed bag. So the pelvis looks better on the back. I think the legs look better on the Zeta. I think the arms are a tie. And I think the backpack looks better on the Zeta. I gotta give it to Zeta. I think the back of it just works better. So let's talk about it. Paint overall goes to Fans Toys. Easy win, no question. Head sculpt goes to Fans Toys. Torso goes to Fans Toys. Both sides. Arms go to Zeta. There's elements about the Fans Toys that look better, but the overall look of both, I think that the Zeta just does that better. The pelvis. I like Zeta from the side better, but it still has its flaws of hiding the joint. Fans Toys hides the joint, but I don't like the look of it as much. But from the front, I like the look of Fans Toys more. Fans Toys gets the point. Upper legs, the thighs, they tie. I like Zeta from the front. I like Fans Toys from the side, so to speak. Lower legs, I like Fans Toys better from the front. It looks more purposeful. It looks more cohesive. They look more like legs, less like robots trying to be legs. But from the side, I think the Zeta does a better job, and I think the feet look more interesting, so I'm tying them out there. The frontal view, I'm tying them out because I think Zeta Zeta gets the proportions, and I think Fans Toys gets the overall presentation. And from the back, I'm giving the point to Zeta. That's a 2-3 win for Fans Toys, and I think that's bloody fair. All right, let's take a look at articulation. So the Fans Toys head is on a hinge swivel. You get up to there, you get down a little bit, left, right, no confused dog look. The Zeta is on a hinge swivel. You get far more up, more down, left, right, and no confused dog look. The Fans Toys has a race swivel with a deep ab crunch. The Zeta has a full waist swivel with a more limited ab crunch. As for shoulders, no butterfly joint, but you get up to 90 degrees. It just really, really, really looks bad. And you get the ratchet all the way around. As for Zeta, ratcheted up to 90 degrees and looks better. And ratchet all the way around. Bicep swivel. Bicep swivel. Elbow to just shy of 90 degrees, but I think we'll call it 90 degrees because it gets so close you could probably tweak it and get it a little closer. Elbow to 90 degrees, no problem. Wrist swivel with the hinge in out. The fingers are fully articulated on a primary, secondary, tertiary hinge, as well as outward swaying movements on the fingers themselves. The thumb can swing down and then has a primary and secondary range, and the thumb itself can swivel. Zeta, wrist swivel, hinge in and out, as opposed to just out. And then the fingers are done the same with a primary, secondary, and tertiary hinge, and they can be displayed out in the same manner. The thumb can swing down, it can swivel, and it has a primary and secondary hinge. Now, it has a ratchet forward and back. The Fans Toys has it side to side. I didn't mention that in the hardware thing, but it's just another category where they tie out in that regard. Now, in the hips, we have hip skirts. They can swing up and out of the way to get full use of the universal, which goes all the way to the full Van Damme, all the way forward, and a little bit back. For the Zeta, once again, the hip skirts will spin out. It's done a little bit more purposefully than the Fans Toys, to be fair. And then you get ratcheted hips that get you forward for the full Monty, rather. You can rotate back as well, fully. You can rotate out to the side 90 degrees. And the hips themselves slide on the pelvis so it can bear weight differently depending on how you have it set up. Thigh swivel around the universal, but it's limited. Thigh swivel at the universal, limited as well. You get a single hinge knee that gets you a little deeper than 90 degrees. The Zeta has a double hinge knee that gets you more, almost the full range for the knee articulation. Moving on to ankles. You do get the ankle tilt up, but I don't think it's intended. You do get a toe tilt. You get an ankle tilt down, and you get a rocker slightly less than 45 degrees. You don't get any ankle tilt up, you don't get any ankle tilt down, and you get an ankle rocker to about 45 degrees. You also get an ankle swivel and a toe tilt with the Zeta. All right, so let's talk articulation. Where do they tie? They tie at the shoulders, technically, but the Zeta does it better aesthetically. They tie at the bicep, they tie at the elbow, they tie at the hands. And to be fair, they both have pretty impressive hands, so to speak. They tie at the thigh swivel, and that's about it. Fans Toys takes abdominal waist area because it has a deeper crunch, and it also takes the feet, although that's somewhat reluctant for me to give them that point because I don't know if that's entirely meant to have an ankle tilt up and down, but I will give it to them. Zeta has a swivel at the ankles, but because it doesn't have the up and down, I'm just going to give it to Fans Toys for the sake of ease, even though I don't technically feel that way. But Zeta still wins anyway, so it's like whatever. Zeta has better wrist articulation. Fans Toys almost matched them. Zeta has better hip articulation. Zeta has better knee articulation, giving Zeta the point for articulation overall. Now, instead of doing transformation engineering of the robots, we're going to talk about assembly easy to combine mode. And honestly, for both, I'm going to tie them out. They both assemble quite easily. The only problems that they have, and both of them have it, are connecting to the feet. But otherwise, both do a really good job of assembling into the combined mode of Ethereaon. The Fans Toys obviously took some cues from the Zeta. The Zeta obviously took some cues from Combiner Wars. You know, everybody's kind of standing on the shoulders of some of the things that worked before it, and I think they're better off for it. Moving on to alt modes. Instead of alt modes, we're just going to do the look of them in robot mode and in jet mode. So in jet mode, the paint helps the Fans Toys look better overall, but the general sculpt of both, I would argue that some of the sculpt work on the Zeta is technically better, or at least more interesting. Robot mode, I think the Fans Toys nailed it. I think that they are a bit more lifeless due to the lack of articulation, but just general aesthetics, I think that they nailed it. Moving on to scale, this is actually pretty challenging. The closest evidence I could find was looking at this. You have to take into account that this Superion is tilted, right? He's not standing flat like the rest of the Sunbow chart, because it's not really an official one, right? So if his bottom foot was on that black line and he was tilted up, the top of his knee is going to come to about that lighter purple line, which puts the Zeta technically closer if you skew it this way. But I am skewing it. But it's the fairest thing that I can reasonably take into account. So I'm going to give the point to Zeta here. I know that one might be controversial. So look, moving on to price, I mean, come on, right? Zeta was $450, I think, as a box set. If you bought them individually, it was under $600, and the Fans Toys one was well over $1,000. So there's just, that's another objective win for Zeta. Can't really argue that one. Moving on to accuracy, I am going to give Fans Toys the point. However, I am giving it to them by a smidge. Let me say this, I can put the wings back on the Zeta to give them that winged look on the forearms. I chose not to. Neither of them really go full cartoon accuracy here, and I think it's for the betterment of the visual presentation. I'm giving Fans Toys the point because they have that horseshoe shaped design in the middle of the chest, which I actually think the Zeta looks better for not having. But if you look at the Fans Toys, like even the extra details in the knees, that's not accurate. And then of course, obviously, both of them have to stay true to the laws of physics in a way where they don't get the color palette right for the lower legs. But Zeta does have the extra color detailings on the feet, which I actually like. Same for the pelvis. Fans Toys does not. So I'm giving Fans Toys the point because I think they are closer, but neither one of them get it right. And I think it's for the best for both pieces. Moving on to presents, I am going to leave the blank space. A lot of times I edit out the blank space when I ask my family what they think looks better. I'm going to leave it so that you can see how long it took for them to debate on this one, because it is not easy. So there might be some silence here that you had to deal with, usually that I cut out. And if there's no silence, then you know that they made a decision pretty quickly, but I think it has merit. So I'm going to leave in the dead space. All right. Which one do you think looks better?
I mean, that's not an easy decision.
I agree.
I mean, oof. Like, I'd love the pearly white on this, but I think I actually like the way this one looks better. Ugh. I don't know that one.
All right, there you go. Thank you. All right, Jaina, which one do you think looks better?
I think they both look pretty good.
I do too.
Yeah. I mean, I think this one probably looks better, but I like this one more.
Okay, that's fair. Which one do you think looks better?
That one.
Okay.
Wow, they're big.
They are big. Which one do you think looks better?
The one.
Get closer and point. That one over there? Okay, thank you. Which brings us to our final scores. So they tie at build because they're both built very well. They tie at transformation because they're both pretty straightforward and easy to assemble with the exception of the legs. They both kind of suffer there with a mainly, but for the most part, they're pretty straightforward. They tie at the alt modes because I think Zeta does the jets better and I think Fans Toys does the robots better. Now, I think Fans Toys jets look better overall, but that's because of the paint added to them, not because of the sculpt. So I decided to rework that because we're already giving Fans Toys a point for paint. They tie at presence because my family was split 50-50, which is fair, honestly. Zeta took hardware, just objectively, and articulation, as well as scale, which is extremely subjective, but I did the best I could there, and price, which is extremely objective. Fans Toys takes the subjective categories of sculpt and arguably even paint and accuracy, as well as materials, in the objective categories of accessories and gimmicks. Now, I know Zeta had talking features in the chromed out version or whatever, but that's not what we're comparing. And even that I would just add to electronics, but I guess you could argue that point. But for my purposes, for what I have and what I'm looking at, it gives Fans Toys the win 6-4 in a very close battle. Most of the categories here were won by one company sort of just edging the other one out, so to speak. It was very close. And I think that's indicative of the two pieces, to be honest. Let's wrap it up and give a few extra details. And I think that that's fair, man. I think that that's fair. I think 6-4 is fair. There's a lot of time between the two. There's a huge price difference between the two. And now my own subjective feelings is I think the Fans Toys does really well at just standing there. I think the Zeta is the overall better combiner in general, effectively, functionality-wise. And I think the Fans Toys is more striking, like, aesthetically, as long as you keep it in that A stance. Now, I'm keeping my Kronos for Superion, and I'm keeping my Fans Toys for Robot Mode, and I'm going to show you why here. So if you look at this picture, this is my Kronos in the position on my collection looking up at, like, a ground level. This is how he looks if I'm just walking by. This is how the Fans Toys looks just walking by. And is there a difference? Sure there is. There's a difference between the two. They are subtle, though. And even more so, it's worth noting that that's zeroing in on one piece. Now let's look at it from a back view. So here's just looking at my whole Transformers collection. Once again, this is with the Kronos. You don't zero in on Kronos, he's just part of the ensemble. And here it is with the Fans Toys. And here's the thing. Both of these companies were going for a very tuned look with a little bit more of a modern aesthetic. This is before Fans Toys switched gears into the strictly tuned look. And as a result, they're both pretty good at what they do. They both get pretty close. And from a distance on the top shelf in my collection, you're not going to be able to appreciate the nuance necessarily between the two. But you will appreciate them on that empty shelf that you see there, which is where my aerial bots actually go. Now, once again, I'll throw in a picture here of the aerial bots on my shelf from Fans Toys, and that's what I wanted. I wish they had a little bit more articulation and a little bit more life, but that's ultimately what I wanted. That's what I spent the big bucks for, so I want to get the biggest bang for my buck. And that's how I feel about this. I will tell you, I think that the combiner is good. I don't know if I think it's worth the overall price. I think other companies have done better or as good for less, but I don't have any regrets about buying it. So that says something as well. It's certainly not bad. But let's get into the more nuanced versus discussion. So if we're talking about best display piece, we take into account build, sculpt, paint, and presence. Now they tie at build, they tie at presence, and Fans Toys takes the sculpt, and Fans Toys takes the paint, making the Fans Toys the overall better display piece. And I would agree. I think that overall, namely due to the paint, and as long as you have it in an A stance, it is the better display piece. Moving on to the best transformer. We take into account build, materials, and transformation. Now they tie at build, they tie at transformation, and Fans Toys takes the materials category, making Fans Toys the better transformer. And I think I agree with that too. I think it's just by a nose hair, but I think it is technically true. And then we'll talk about the most playable. So we take into account build, materials, articulation, transformation, and accessories. And Fans Toys takes the accessories and the materials, they tie at build, Zeta takes the articulation, and they tie at transformation. And that gives Fans Toys the most playable, and once again, just by a nose hair, and once again, I think that's fair. There is an element to the Zeta that as you move it around, you have to kind of clean it up. There's an element of that too with the Fans Toys, just not as much. So I think that this is all fair data. Once again, you have to take into account one is more than double the price, and one came out 5 to 6 years later than the other. That Zeta has held its test of time. They're both great combiners. For me, that price isn't necessarily worth the fans' toys for the combiner price. It's actually made me pretty confident that I might sell my Minosaur when that's finished and just keep the robot modes for that as well. But only time will tell, and I'm not going to predict that. Speaking of Minosaur, a couple people wanted to see him compared with the DX9 Minosaur. I will be doing that in the sit-down Saturday. That's a retrospective look at the Ethereaon overall. That'll be on Patreon very soon. I'm hoping next week, but I might have a versus plan, and that versus I might put on Patreon. I haven't decided yet, but it's coming soon, so to speak. Either way, I think they did a pretty good job for their first effort. I think it's one of the most stable as long as you have it in an A stance. And I'm excited to see what they want to do in the future. I don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I know a lot of people took my collapsing of the legs as an illustration that it's bad. I don't feel that way. I just think that Fans Toys piece is limited. And so are all the bots. So in some ways, it's just following through. That set is a limited set. But it looks pretty. And it's fairly stable in that limited pose. And I hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.